Hello, well in this film I'm going to show you how I make my belts. Now these are the ones that you can buy from my online shop, bucklehurstleather.co.uk, and there's a link on my channel header. So do take a look at the nice belts, they're great value and they're beautifully made. But here goes, I'll show you how I make them. You need to get hold of some nice high quality vegetable tanned leather like this. And I showed you in an earlier film how I cut the straps using a special strap cutting tool. And this is full grain, full thickness. It's the bee's knees really of leather, but it's lovely for belts, good and strong. I like traditional saddler's crease lines down a belt. I just think it makes them look far better quality, and it's a nice finishing detail. So I use saddler's crease tool, which I'm just heating up now. So I'm just putting a nice crease line down the belts now. Once the crease lines are on the belt, the next job then is to actually bevel off the edges and make them nice and rounded over. And you could say, well, why bother with this stage, because most shop belts wouldn't have rounded over edges. But it just makes for a nice quality finish, and it makes the belt more comfortable because you've got a round edge rather than a squared hard edge digging into the side of you. So it's a nice detail, and it just makes it more comfortable. So just taking off, it's only a little bit, but it's enough to just give that rounding on that edge. So do that on all corners. So do it on the back as well. And so you end up with a lot of spaghetti at the end of this process, but you also end up with a nice lot of rounded belts. Right, the next step now is to apply dye to the edges to make them look nice and deep black, as it's black leather. So I have my bottle of dye. It's a standard water-based dye in a strange bottle, but my supplier had run out of the usual bottles and a dauber. And the idea here is to very carefully go along the edge, soaking the dye in. Not too much, but not so, too little that it doesn't actually get in there. And if you get any dye on the face of the leather, just need to wipe it off. So I'll carry on dyeing. Well, having rounded and dyed the edges, the next step is to get the rivet and buckle assembly parts all in place. So I use a little template for this, and it just helps line up so everything matches. And I use a little pricker tool just to mark out where the rivets go and where the buckle pin goes. So just like that, makes it nice and quick, and mark the end there. So that's all ready. Next job is to punch it all out. So then I put it on an anvil with a poly protection board, and I can just then cut the parts out. So this is the end of the belt at the back. Just use little punches to cut them, and then straight in for doing the holes. I'm using a French cobbler's hammer. I keep one hammer for my punching and one for smoothing over. So that's now ready for the Clew Punch, which is for the buckle. Again, I just place that in position, make sure it's central. It takes a bit more hitting because it's obviously larger. That's okay. And so that's ready for skiving, which will be the next operation. Yeah, the idea with skiving is to remove some of the leather from the back of the buckle area to basically make the belt look thinner, make it more attractive and not so bulky around the waist. So it's a bit of extra effort, but it's well worth it because it makes the whole thing sit nicely and stops it sort of sticking out. So again, it's a refinement, but it's what you get on a nice quality belt. So I'm just taking that down, make it a bit slimmer. I'm using a tool, just a simple blade and a holder. So that's the idea, you go from a full thickness and you taper it down to a thin thickness. That's skiving. So once I've skived all round, I just put a bit of dye so it doesn't notice basically the sort of raw edges. Just again, it's a little finishing detail, but it's all these little things make the belts rather nice. The next step is to fix the buckle. So I just soften the leather where it's going to have to bend round for the buckle assembly. And that moisture will just help that leather bend a bit more easily. I then take the buckle, make sure I've got it the right way around, pop it through, bend the leather so that the rivet holes all line up. And then make sure that the buckle is all moving nicely, and just work that leather, which is just soaked, down as flat as one can get it, and then put the first 2 rivets into position. That's one. So that's the buckle initially attached. I'll tighten up those rivets. The next step then will be to make a belt keeper, which will get wedged in, and there'll be 2 more rivets to hold that belt keeper in position. The next step is to smooth over these rounded belt edges. So I'm just using what's called gum trag, and you use a little wooden tool here called a slicker, and just go up and down the leather, and it gets sort of leather fibres resting nice and flat, and it goes shiny and smooth and nice. Well, next thing is to make the belt keepers, so to keep the belt flap nicely, and I rivet these. So first step is to skive off the back so that you can make them nice and slim. And it's the same principle really as before with the buckle. Just get it nice and skived down. Just reducing the thickness of the leather. There we are. So that's thicker in the middle, thinner each end. And punch in a couple of holes. I'd normally do this on my anvil, but there we are. 1, 2. There's my holes. Then what you need to do is get your belt, and I'm using my template, another thickness of leather basically. Spray your keeper so that the leather bends. Again, it's very similar principle to before. Place it in position and bend over. And you've got it roughly sized correctly, which that is. Just let that loosen a little bit. Yeah, that's sliding quite happily. Mark your holes. And then punch them. It's quite involved keepers, they take quite a bit of work. Next job then is to rivet them. So I'm using single cap rivets so they lie flush. With all of this, the whole time you want to make the belt look as slim as you can, because it just looks more attractive when it's on someone's waist if it's slimmer and not sticking out inappropriately. So it takes more effort, but it gives you a better final product. So those are now in position. I've just got to hit them down. So I'll put a little mandrel behind, and I'll do that on my anvil. I just hit them with a closing tool to close those. So those are now in position. I've just got to hit them down. So I'll put a little mandrel behind, and I'll do that on my anvil. I just hit them with a closing tool to close those. So there you have it, a belt keeper. And just to check it's all okay, slide it on the belt. So that will get wedged, you see, between another set of rivets. But you want to have this so that it's a fairly easy fit in. It will loosen a little bit, but it's a tad tight, but I think it's partly because this belt is swollen out at the end of the hide. Right, okay. Try again. Yeah, that's what you want, a nice easy slide in fit, but not so loose it's rattling. So that's the principle of the keeper, and what I'll do next is just put 2 rivets in there and tighten them up, and that will secure the keeper and stop it shifting around. These rivets are really strong, and it's a good way of fixing the keeper in and keeping the whole belt together, because once these are in, they're pretty impossible to get out. So that's it, and they're obviously hidden by the belt once the flap goes through. So totally hidden, you see. Well, next stage is to do the buckle holes, and again I use a template just because I find you get more consistent, higher quality results. So I'll just mark this with my starting hole, and I just lay the template on top, and then I mark out my holes. I use oval holes because they don't sag in the belt in the same way as round holes. So a lot of manufactured belts will have round holes, but they start to look unsightly very quickly, whereas the oval holes, they're really stronger. So it's a far better thing to do. I then do the punching. So first off, get the belt end. So I'm doing an English V point for the belt end. And in a minute I'll actually bevel underneath that so that it goes through the belt keeper more happily, and I'll also die the end. And it's little finishing details like that. They take time, but they make the whole finished item look so much better quality. And then a series of oval holes. I get rather used to doing these. Takes a little bit of skill to get them right, but they do look nice. And it's the way they were done of old. It's the best way. It's just a bit more care needed. So there you are, that's the holes. The final step now is just to shave off on the point here to make sure that it fits underneath the keeper very nice and smoothly. It's a little bit of finishing detail, but it's the kind of thing that when you use the belt you'll realise why it's been done. I'm just applying a little bit of dye to that front cut end just to finish that off. There we are. Make sure there's none on the front, and that's fine. I like to stamp all of my belts with the Bucklehurst leather stamp. The sign of quality. I carefully position the stamp and then give it one firm hit, like that. Then the final step, as I'm making these for gifts, is I pop them in a nice box with Bucklehurst leather. So tissue wrap them, and you end up with a nice belt with a post. So please do have a look at my website, bucklehurstleather.co.uk, and there are lots of lovely belts on there. And I send them through the post, and they come in these boxes. So do make very nice gifts as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.